Well, 5 minutes in. Okay, so we're building off of where we left off last week, right? So can anyone just remind me very simply, what is our Mishnah that we're still on, say?
If
Michael?
if you've got someone who's riding on top of an animal, spots an object, says to a person who's on the ground, "Go get it for me." The person on the ground decides they would like the object. Under what circumstances would each person have the presumptive right to it?
Exactly. Right. So what are the two circumstances the Mishnah details?
So, if the person on the ground, um, like takes it and then says, I'm taking it for myself before handing it over, then they acquire the object themselves. And if afterwards, after handing the object over to the person who's on the animal, they say, actually, I picked it up for my own sake, not for yours, they're not considered to have said anything meaningful. The object goes to the person who is Rochev.
Exactly. Beautiful. Okay. So that was our Mishnah. And then most of last week's sugya was honestly focused more sort of on this Mishnah and Peah, and then how our Mishnah Bava Metziah basically would influence the correct interpretation of that Mishnah, right? And we had this dispute that hinged around the principle that Ula called migo de zachin and nafshe zachin ami lechavre. But he was using this term in a bit of a different way than we had seen it previously. So can anyone explain to me how is Ula using the term migo de zachin and nafshe zachin ami lechavre? And to give a background, he used this principle as the reason why an ani could acquire peah for another ani. Michael?
This was the case of like the two Migos, right? Like because he could say like I myself am right if he were to like forfeit his property and therefore be eligible for paya, um, that he could then say like because I could have acquired it for myself, I can therefore like acquire it for someone else, whoever I want it to be, right? Like not just whichever ani I see first, but a particular person.
Right. So that second part is what because the two Migos, right? So the way Ula read the Mishnah, he read the one versus two Migos as being the dispute of the Rabbanon versus Rabbi Eliezer, right? The Rabbi Eliezer says we can do the two Migos. The rabbis just say we can do one. But Ula thinks everyone holds one Migo to Zachay Ledavshe. And that's exactly as you said, right? That because I could have gotten this for myself, I can acquire it entirely for somebody else, right? And so that framing actually maps really neatly onto a principle that we saw a couple dapim ago, but phrased differently by Rami Bar Chama. What did Rami Bar Chama call this principle back on Chet Amud Aleph when dealing not with Peah, but with lost objects? Sarah? Exactly, right? That one who lifts a found object for somebody else can acquire it entirely for that other person. And seemingly the same principle would apply, right? That since anybody can acquire a Metziah, you had the ability to get it for yourself, you could entirely acquire it for somebody else. Whereas Rav Nachman, he differed with Ula's interpretation, and he thought that our Mishnah was one of the things that disproved the idea of the way Ula used Migo de Zache Lenafshe, aka Hamagbiya Metzila Chavero. How Rav Nachman, the way he read the Mishnah, understood the first clause as proving that Hamagbiya Metzila Chavero lo kana Chavero. How does that work in the Rav Nachman world? Again, this is where the person on the, like, I'm on my horse, I tell her of Joel, please give that sefer for me. And as he's walking it over, he says, actually, this is my sefer. And Rav Nachman said that proves Hamagbiya Metzila Chavero lo kana Chavero. Sarah?
Because if he, sorry, you will hear my chavruta in the background here. If he had, if it were the case that Bava Metziah lechavero kana chavero, then as soon as the guy picked it up, he would have already transferred ownership to the first person who told him to go get it. And obviously that can't be what happened because that doesn't make sense with the way that the Mishnah plays out.
Exactly, right? The way Rav Nachman narrated our Mishnah is that when I send Joel to go pick up that Sefer, Joel picks up the Sefer with me in mind, and then as he's walking it over, is like, actually, this is quite nice, and I would like it to be mine, right? And if he's able to do that, if he's able to change his mind, it must be that I didn't acquire it when he first picked it up, right? Whereas Ula defended himself by saying, no, what the person is saying in that first clause is I never picked it up for you, right? When Rav Joel says this is mine, what he's actually telling me is from the moment I saw that Sefer, I decided I wanted it, right? So I picked it up for myself. But had I picked it up for you, it would be yours. Okay. That is where we left off last time. And then this section is going to, continue with some of these ideas, but pick up on the idea of Hamagbiya Metzil Chaviro and why specifically we would or wouldn't consider that to work. So, Rev Joel, was that a hand?
Yeah, I just wanted to. I mean, we're probably going to cover this later, so you can shut me down if you want. But the difference between like Bava Metziah chavero kana chavero and ibaye the zachel and nafshe zachel nam chavre, there are differences between, even though we
yes, we will get into them.
Okay, so
no, don't worry. But yes, there is overlap, as in I would say there is one that is contained within the other, but they are not synonymous. Okay. So we are on Yud Amud Aleph. We are at Rav Nachman Rav Chisda. Jacob, can you start us off?
Yeah, I can start us off. So Rav Nachman Rav Chisda the Amri Tarvatu Hamagbiya Metziah Chavero Lo Kana Chavero My Taima Ave Tofes L'Balchov B'Makom Shechav L'Acherim Tofes L'Balchov B'Makom Shechav L'Acherim Lo Kana.
Okay.
So Rav Nachman and Rav Chisda that they both say when he lifts an object for his fellow doesn't inquire for a fellow person. My time. What's the reason? They're grabbing for from for someone who is owed a debt in a place where he owes other people. And when he's grabbing for someone who's owed a debt in a place where he owes other people, doesn't acquire.
Right. The one thing I would just sharpen was the have. I would translate as this is like the case of.
Yeah.
Right? That like this is comparable to that scenario, and we know the deed in that scenario. So look at the Rashi on the have tofes the balchov b'mkom shechav l'cherim.
Yep. So have tofes the balchov b'mkom shechav l'cherim ki adam haba me'elav v'tofes mamon chavera b'shvil chov sheish la'acher alav. So like a person that comes from, I can't remember what Me'ela, like just from out of nowhere essentially, or
yeah, out of nowhere slash of his own accord.
Okay.
Is how which will actually be very crucial to some other Rishonim dunking on Rashi. But Rashi said like a person who's coming of his own accord.
And he grabs the money of his friend because of a debt that he has to another person. Not the friend having the debt, the person who grabs has the debt. Uval lakdim adlo yitfasenu balchov acher. ונמצא תופסך בתפיסתו זאת את נושאים האחרים. So, and he comes before another Balchov was able to grab. Then we find this like grabbing is obligated with what he grabs to the other claimants, the other people who are owed a debt.
So I would say for Chav,
Yeah.
look at the next Rashi on Chav La'acherim.
Chav La'acherim, mafsid et ha'acherim, kmo ein chavin la'adam. So he causes the others to lose out.
Exactly.
Right.
Great. Do you know what this quote from Ketubot is?
I did not
What
get a
the
chance.
phrases?
I didn't get a chance to look it up.
No worries. Anybody off the top of their heads? The Ein Chavin L'Adam. Rav Joel?
Shalom b'fanav.
Exactly. Ein Chavin L'Adam Shelo B'fanav as opposed to Zochin L'Adam Shelo B'fanav, right? That we have these two principles. You can benefit a person even when they're not around, but you can't cause a loss to them without them around and without, their explicit permission and consent. So, right, beautiful. The case, as Jacob just translated for us, I owe money to Rev Joel and Rev Nachum and Josie. And I owe each of them $5,000, but I only have $7,000 left of possessions. And Jacob specifically feels an allegiance to Rev Joel. He's like, Rev Joel really needs that $5,000 back. Lexie is overdue in paying him. And I don't have enough money to pay all three of them. So as a good friend of Rev Joel's, according to the Rashi interpretation, you just elect to go and take my property to pay back my debt, right? Because you want Rev Joel to get all of his money, but in doing so, you have guaranteed that, Rev Nachum and Josie are not going to get their full pay, right? So in trying to seize for Rev Joel, you have caused a loss to other people. And so therefore, the deen is that it doesn't work, right? And so just explain to me, Jacob or anybody else, how are Rav Nachman and Rav Chisda mapping this onto the case of Bava Metziah l'Chaveiro? How are they comparable?
Well, if you're grabbing something so a debt to someone else can be paid back, you are lifting up the object and acquiring for them rather than going by the normal procedures that there are when someone owes multiple debts and can't pay all of them back. And we have the ruling, we have the halacha clear that you can't just do this. And
Well,
so
we see that it doesn't work, right? Again, in this case of the third party seizing the debt or they're causing a loss, right? But when I pick up a lost object, right? It was just, instead of the scenario before, there's just a sefer that's sitting on the hefker table. And I'm like, wow, Rav Joel would really love that sefer. And I pick it up for him. How does that impact everybody else?
Right. So the question is if there's just something hefker that you're trying to lift.
Yeah, I just picked up a hefker book. Jess, I saw a hand.
Yeah, if I take the book, then it deprives everyone else of the opportunity of claiming that book. Precisely.
Anybody, before I picked up the sefer, also, hello, well, I was going to say hello to Rav Nachum, but still can't hear us. If that sefer, prior to me picking it up, it was available to anybody. And when I picked that up for Rav Joel, I am benefiting Rav Joel at the cost of everybody else, right? So that is seemingly the way these things map onto one another. If you think, I don't actually believe those to be perfectly comparable, then never fear. Various Rishonim and at least one other Amora will agree with you. And so we'll unpack some of the potential differences between those scenarios. But that seems to be the comparison that Rav Nachman and Rav Chisda are making. Okay. There, Rav Nachman. Okay. So now we are going to pick back up in the Gemara. Josie, do you want to read Etive Rava?
Sure. Excuse me. Etive Rava, the Rav Nachman, Mitziat Poel Atzmo, Bama Devar Amarim, Bizman She'amar Lo Ba'al HaBayit, Nikesh Ami Hayom, Adur Imi Hayom. Aval Amar Lo, Asal Imi Malacha Hayom, Mitziato Shel Ba'al HaBayit Hu.
Okay.
So Rava is going to counter this with another Tanatic source. And he says if a worker finds an object, the worker acquires it for himself. So if you're working, and what is the case here? When somebody hires a worker and says, come till the field with me, weed with me, pick things up with me. So you'd be digging around in the dirt and all this, somebody finds gold coins. Okay, so he finds them, and that they belong to the person who was weeding, and not the person who hired him, because he was hired specifically to weed and till, and not to pick up coins. But if the employer says, "Come work with me," and doesn't specify specifically tilling or weeding, then it belongs to the employer, because the employer hired you to do pretty much anything, and that includes encountering gold coins and finding them.
Exactly, right? That when he says just do work for me today, then anything that you do that day until you terminate your contract is considered to be on the Baal HaBayit's behalf, right? So fine, which part of, Rashi answers this, but just to test your Rashi knowledge before reading, which part of this Baraita is Rava using as the challenge for Rav Nachman?
So it sounds like the specificity of the equation. If you unspecify, just say hire somebody to do something, it's like go pick it up. It maps cleanly onto you see something on the ground, you tell somebody go pick it up for me, and acquire it for me.
Can you spell it for me? How is that a challenge for Rav Nachman?
So Rav Nachman would say, in this case, that under no circumstances would the employee have acquired it on behalf of the employer. So the employee would always acquire it for him or herself, and never on behalf, because Rav Nachman would say,
right, exactly. So he's using the Seifa as the challenge, right? The Reisha, Shkoyach, the Paul gets his own Metziah. But in the Seifa, fine, the Baraita gets into the reason why, seemingly, of like, okay, you're working for the Baal HaBayit, the work is done on his behalf. But nonetheless, this seems like a case of one individual acquiring an object entirely for another individual. So on its surface, it seems like a solid kashya. But Rav Nachman has what I think is a fairly intuitive response. So read his response, Amar Le.
Amar Le sha'ani poel diado ki yad Baal HaBayit hu. So the retort is that this case is different, because a worker, literally his hand is like the hand of the employer or the Baal HaBayit, right? That you are an extension of the desire of the employer, and that's it. All of your work is work for hire, and that's the end of the story there.
Right, that like there is a way, and I do think there is something intuitive to this, in saying that like a worker is considered to be more of like an automatic extension of the Baal HaBayit than a miscellaneous person just lifting something for their friend, right? That maybe there's a difference between like I'm doing something for a person who maybe didn't even tell me to, versus like I'm currently operating in a capacity where the things that I do are considered to be on behalf of another person, right? So maybe that extends even to Metziahs. But we have this statement of Rav that maybe challenges this. V'ha'amar Rav.
So we retort to this. So Rav, so we have this statement of Rav that says that an employee could terminate his employment at any time, even up to half the day. And so assumingly, if I could say, I'm no longer working for you and I found these gold coins, I'm going to take them for me. And then I'm no longer your extension. I am my own person and I can go my happy way.
Great. It's interesting. That's how most people I've seen intuitively read this. And I think it's part of the essential point, right? That like, first of all, if a worker can quit at any point, they simply could just, if they wanted to, choose when they find something to quit and then pick it up for themselves. And also, I think that there's sort of a broader essence of the Poel employer relationship this is getting at. Any thoughts on like how else does this challenge the Kayad Bal Habayitu premise? There isn't like one singular correct answer. I have a thought in mind, but Jess?
If the Poel has the agency to retract their offer of employment, then they clearly have agency. They're not fully an extension of the Bal Habayit. They have the ability to make decisions for themselves.
Exactly. I think that that's sort of the broader underlying thing being expressed here, which is that if the Poel has enough agency and independence that at any point, like they're able to terminate this relationship with the Bal Habayit, can we really just treat them as like an automatic extension of the Bal Habayit? Like they're not, they're their own independently operating person, even if like they don't have the same level of independence as like a random friend doing something for another friend. That's certainly more so than a slave, right? They have the option to terminate this relationship. So maybe that doesn't mean they could just be treated like the hand of the Bal Habayit. But Michael?
I also just want to clarify in terms of this that like what we're talking about is right in this line of reasoning. Like I think one of my initial reads of Laxorbo had been basically to like I just want to clarify that it's wrong. Was this notion of like the Poel is backing out of the agreement and saying like the gold coins that I found in the ground are worth more than my wages. Like you keep the wages, I'm keeping the coins. You're like the reading that we're talking about here goes in a different direction of like even without having to actually back out of the agreement, the fact that you can back out of the agreement itself is enough to indicate that there may be a world in which the Poel keeps the coins.
Yeah, I think, or why they should keep the coins if we didn't say Bava Metziah lechavero kana chavero, right? That we know based off the Breita that the coins are for the Bal Habayit, but that if we don't think that an independent person could acquire for another, then this logic would say that the Poel is like enough of an independent actor that without the Bava Metziah lechavero kana chavero principle, the coins should be theirs. And just, yeah, to clarify, this idea of Yachol Achzor Bo Afilu B'Chatzi Hayom is something that comes up one of the more well-studied chapters of Metziah, the one that we're now in Daf Yomi, Hasocher to Omanin, which is where all of the like workers' rights halacha comes up. And so this is one that comes up there, which is that like, yeah, workers have the ability to terminate their contract at any point, right? Even if you decided that you like said someone you're going to work for a whole day, you can decide halfway through the day that you don't want to do it, and they still have to pay you for the labor that you've done up until then. And basically, not only that, but you have like potentially something of an advantage, even if like wages change for the second half. That gets more into the nitty-gritty, but like you have this ability to stop working for them at any point and still collect the value of like the labor you've performed. And I think that the response of Rav Nachman maybe helps clarify at least the reason that I think this is the main point that the Gemara is making in bringing the challenge. So Josie, do you want to read this last bit? Or sorry, Rev Joel wants to say something first.
Well, maybe someone will clarify because Josie, I heard someone else say your point too that Michael, you're also bringing up now, and I think the only way, like if you said that it's because they can quit and then take the Metziah, I think that would be a challenge to the halacha itself, the initial Rav Nachman statement that Bemed Devim Amorim, oh, like if he's just doing all general malacha, it has to go to the Baal Habayit. But I don't see that really. Maybe someone can explain to me, but I haven't been able to connect how that would be a challenge to the idea that he's not the Yad Habal in the same way, as opposed to Rav Lexie's explanation, which does seem like a challenge to that he's a challenge to the idea that he's the Yad Habal. So maybe someone could either clarify for me, or maybe I'm missing something as to how the fact that he could quit and then pick up the Metziah himself is proof against him being Yad Habal. People understand my question? Is that, or is it, yeah.
Just even to like maybe I'm taking your question too far instead of answering it, but like it seems like actually the fact that if that's what the Gemara were saying, then it would seem to imply that kind of the opposite, right? That he has to quit in order to not be Yad Habal, such that he can pick it up for himself. In much the same way that like, the rich person can, could in theory has to renounce all their possessions in order to collect payah. So yeah, it seems like that actually, it's like a worse problem than maybe you initially raised, if that makes sense. I don't have a good answer.
Yeah, I think in the end, like, again, we could, if anybody else has thoughts on that. I think there is something intuitive. Like a lot of people have had that as their read. So I think there is something very intuitive about that of the like, what do you mean I'm acting as an extension of the Baal? Like if I could just not be at any moment and pick it up for myself. But I think that, again, especially based off of how we'll see the Rav Nachman's defense of himself goes, that part of the underlying challenge has to be this idea that Rav's statement implies that even while the Poel is working for the Baal Habayit, which is what the Baraita is referring to, nonetheless, he has a level of like agency and freedom that would mean he is not considered to be Yad Baal Habayit. Yeah, as Rav Joel said, like it's come up a lot, so I think there is something that makes a lot of sense about it. But let's read Rav Nachman's answer, and then we can try and unpack that a little bit more. So, Josie, do you want to wrap this up with the?
Sure. So Amar Le, so in Rav Nachman would respond, Kol kamadelo hadarbe ki ad balabayitu. Ki hadarbe ta'ama. So Rav Nachman would say, well, while he's working for the Balabayit, if he found it while working for the Balabayit, it still belongs to the Balabayit. He hasn't quit yet. So it's sort of like, I'm digging, and I find the coins, but I found the coins before I quit. I didn't know I was going to find the coins when I quit. So there's a little bit of a time ordering implied here. And so there would be like the Balabayit. Ki hadarbe. Ki hadarbe. Tama harina. Ki hadarbe. Tama harina. Hudichtiv. Ki li b'nei Israel avadim. Avadaihem v'lo avadim la'avadim. So there's another way of looking at this is that at any time, if you're an employee, you're not a slave to somebody, you're not entirely tied up with them. And the proof text for this is from Vayikra, that the Jews are servants of God and not servants of servants.
Right. So can somebody in their own words articulate how is Rav Nachman defending his logic, right? How is he saying the Rav statement doesn't disprove the notion that a Poel while working is Kiyad Bal Habayit?
Lexie, can you just repeat that question?
Yeah. So the challenge that Rav Nachman was facing is that seemingly the ability of a Poel to quit at any time means they have like a level of agency and freedom that makes it hard to consider them as just like an automatic hand of the Baal Habayit. Therefore, if they acquire for the Baal Habayit, that must be comparable to a Bava Metziah l'chaveiro. And Rav Nachman is saying, no, it's still true Bava Metziah l'chaveiro lo kana chaveiro. the reason a poel acquires for a Baal Habayit in the case of Asay Malacha Imi Hayom is because he is considered an extension of the Baal Habayit. He says that is still true. And the fact that the poel can change their mind and quit at any point doesn't undermine that fact. Why? Jess?
Because sure, the worker can opt out of being the hand of the Baal Habayit, but not because they are not the hand of the Baal Habayit while they are employed. That's for a different reason, which is this like totally fascinating statement that we are God's servants and not Avdei Avadim, aka we have the freedom to quit, but that does not mean that while we don't exercise that freedom, we're not the hand of the Baal Habayit.
Exactly. Right. Beautiful. But he says the fact that you're able to quit says nothing about before then. Before then, you're a worker and you're working for the Baal Habayit and you are considered an extension of him. Right. And like, as Jess put, I think really beautifully, the fact that you have the capacity to quit, that right doesn't come from an inherent sort of like separateness or independentness that you are able to sort of exert while still working for them. It's because of this sort of like almost gzeret hakatuv of like, you shouldn't be forced to continue working for other people who are not me, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, if you don't want to. But like, until you decide to stop, you are working for them. Now, if people are thinking, what does this mean about Evet Ivri? Then that's a great question, which lots of Rishonim do comment about, both about the permissibility or lack thereof of selling yourself to be an Evet Ivri, of having one. It's a complicated thing, but this drash does come up a lot in the Socher Umanin parak because, yeah, it's like used sort of as one of the theological undergirdings of workers' rights in general, of like, shkoyach, you're like fully subjugated to me, Hashem, but to like other human beings, you should have some measure of agency. You shouldn't be considered utterly subjugated to them.
And we have that, I mean, this is also, it has to be interpreted pretty narrowly because we have agency and we're responsible for our own actions in other cases. If we, while digging around in the dirt, damage something, we puncture that natural gas pipeline, right, that's running underneath, right? We're responsible for that damage. We aren't necessarily an extension of the Baal Habayit in that case. So this loss of agency has to be very narrowly interpreted, not broadly interpreted, saying, well, if I'm running around digging things and I kick up a rock and I knock something over, it's all on the Baal Habayit.
Well, so that's actually only partially true, right? In that if some damage is done while you are behaving in exactly the correct, like the way that is expected of you and what the Baal Habayit hired you to do, then you aren't liable, right? If you are a poel doing exactly normal, solid quality work, doing exactly the job the Baal Habayit hired you to do, and it wasn't like he hired you to steal something, he hired you to like do a normal job, and like the thing he hired you to do caused damage, he's actually liable. You would only be liable if you behave differently, like you did not perform the job as you had been told to do. Right?
And so you're negligent or something like that, yes.
Exactly. But when the point seemingly of this Baraita is that when you are acting just as you were told to do by the Baal Habayit, you are considered an extension of them. Right? So if the Baal Habayit just said, do work for me today, then that includes in the course of you're doing any kind of work, finding a Metziah and getting it for them. So it's true that like, I do think it is a fair point that there are ways in which a poel, scenarios in which they can be treated as an independent person from the Baal Habayit in a way that a slave can't, right? That like a slave's damages, I mean, well, that's a whole other thing. Slaves can't pay for their damages. There are cases where masters are responsible. There are cases where they aren't. Rav Joel, was that a hand?
Well, yeah, but that's about an Evet Kanani too, as opposed to Evet Ivri.
Correct.
He is responsible for if they do things with negligence. So correct.
Because again, getting into the Evet Ivri thing, and as Rav Joel pointed out, the irony of this pasuk actually being, in the case of talking about an Evet Ivri going free in Yovel, is seen as an intermediate case, right? Ultimately, they are seen as like an indentured servant rather than a slave. Despite the fact that there are at times sort of blurry boundaries between what that means. Okay, so I think really interesting conceptual discussion, bigadol, about like how do we understand the relationship of like workers to their employers? How do we understand that relationship as opposed to just like two people independently interacting with one another? But in the end, by the end of this exchange, Rav Nachman has like defended himself, right? You don't have to find it perfectly compelling, but he has like managed to defend himself. You know, he hasn't been sufficiently disproven by Rava, which also just a side point. Why is it funny that Rava is challenging him here? This is a Chazara question. You can sneak a peek at the Tosfot if you want to hint. Jacob?
Well, I'm remembering that with was it Rami Bar Chama? Rava challenged the idea of Hamagbiya Metziah Chavero Kana Chavero. It ended up getting to like the Zachi L'Nafshe, Zachi L'Chafre.
Precisely, right? Back when we were first introduced to these concepts, it was Rava who was arguing against Rami Bar Chama, who had said that Kana Chavero. And now we see him challenging Rav Nachman here from the opposite stance. So the Tosfot's take is that this happened first and he was convinced by Rav Nachman. And so then, you know, non-sequentially, the exchange we see with Rami Bar Chama happens later after he's been convinced lo kana chavero. But some of the other Rishonim think it could be dafka lehefech, it could be the opposite, or it could be that like, you know, in one of these cases, we see more likely in the case of Rami Bar Chama, because there it's about a proof rather than about a principle, that we've talked about this before, the idea of sometimes it's very clear Amoraim disagree about the halacha, and sometimes they seem to be arguing more about the way that the other person proves their halacha, right? Where they don't necessarily disagree with the psak, but they're like, the way you prove that is just not definitive, right? So on Chet Amud Aleph, the primary thing Rava was saying is that Rami Bar Chama, you can't prove that principle from our Mishnah, right? Our Mishnah could just be based off this principle of when I'm acquiring, I can also acquire for somebody else. So that's not sufficient proof that I could acquire entirely for somebody else. But maybe he does agree with the psak in the end. Okay. And now that gets into the larger discussion of how do we end up paskening. So this last bit will be very essential in that. Alish, do you want to read the Amar Rabbi Chia bar Abba?
אמר רבי חייא בר אבא, אמר רבי יוחנן, המגביה מציע לחברו קנה חברו. ואם תאמר משנתנו ואמר תנרי ולא אמר זכרי. Okay, that's my Mishnah. So Rav Chia bar Chama says in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, Magbiya Metzia lechavero kana chavero. Okay, and if you say that our Mishnah contradicts that because it seems to say that doesn't kana chavero.
Wait, so remind me, why would our Mishnah be a challenge for this?
Because according to according to Rabbi Nachman, it's like lo kana, right?
Right, but how did our Mishnah prove that, seemingly?
So right. So you're asking why would our Mishnah say
this is a good Rashi. It's helpful for Chazara. Here, look at the Rashi on Im Tamar Mishnatenu.
דקתני אני זכיתי בה, זכה בה. משמען, אני זוכה בה עכשיו. זכה בה, ואף על פי שהגביה לצורך חברו. אוקיי. היינו טעמה משום דקתני
Or pause, sorry, pause before the Haynu Tama. The first part is
explained. Okay. So it comes the challenge from the Mishnah, the Katane, because it teaches Ani Zachitiba, when he says Ani Zachitiba, so he's Zoche, and we learn from it that I'm acquiring it now, even if he picked it for his friend, so he still, like, it still belongs to him.
Right. So that was the Rav Nachman narration of our Mishnah, right? That in the case of me asking Rav Joel to get the Sefer, he went, picked it up for me, and then while walking it over to me, decided he wanted it more and decided to acquire it. And our Mishnah says that works, which again would seem to imply that when he tried to pick it up for me, that was not effective, right? So this is why it's seemingly a challenge to Hamagbiya Metziah Lechavero, Lo Kana Chavero. But then translate for me the response in the Gemara. What's the response to that challenge?
Tenari. So if it says, like if he said, give it to me, and he picked it up, so then it doesn't work. But if he said Zechali, acquire it for me, and he picked it up, so the one who said it, he acquires the object.
Great. Look back in the Rashi, pick up the Haynu Tama, because he expands on this a little bit.
Haynu Tama. Mishum de Katanei ve'amar lechavero tenali. So the reason is because he said, give it to me. Velo amar zecha otali, like acquire it for me. Behagbahatecha. Okay, zechali ata behagbahatecha. נמצא שלא עשאו שליח להקנות בהגבהתה עד שעת נתינה. והרי קודם נתינה הדר בו זה משליחותו. So if he said, so if he said tenali, so he didn't make him a shaliach for the purpose of, like, acquiring the object for himself. So I'm confused by the order. So להקנות בהגבהתה עד שעת נתינה, והי קודם נתינה הדר בו זה משליחותו. So like, so what does he say? He says, like, that before he gave it to him, yeah, I'm confused. I don't think I'll put it together.
Before, when I said, Rav Joel, get me that Sefer, when is he acting on my behalf? Explicitly? Or sorry, when you say give me that Sefer, when is he explicitly acting on my behalf? That's more precise.
Like, right. Or like only when he gives it to you.
When he hands it over to me. That's the only time he was acting for me. Before then, he's an independent agent.
Right. Okay, great.
What this logic is. If I said, Rav Joel, could you get that Sefer for me? Could you acquire it for me? Then the assumption is I'm saying from the moment you pick it up, you're doing that for me, right? And so this argument says if that had been my phrasing, it would have been mine from the moment he picked it up. When I said, please give it to me, until he gives it to me, he wasn't acting on my behalf. And that's why I haven't acquired it. Rav Joel?
Sorry, Rav Lexie, I'm actually reading Rashi that you are a shaliach the whole time, right? Because Rashi actually uses the words, where does he say, I got to find it again? He says,
you are a shaliach to acquire for him.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, he's a shaliach to get it, just not a shaliach to acquire, right? Because you have to be batel, you have to do bitul on your shlichut in order to acquire it for yourself at some point. So,
yeah, but essentially the way Rashi, and I think that's a useful clarification, that Rashi sees this as, yes, Rav Joel, when I tell him to give it to me, because getting it is an essential part of giving it to me, he is acting on my behalf from the moment he gets it. But when he picks it up, it is not with the intent to acquire it for me in that picking up. right? It's only, the intent is for me to only acquire it by him handing it over to me. Whereas when I say, get that for me, acquire that for me, then the intent is that from the moment he picks it up, it is mine. So what is interesting about this resolution of our Mishnah, right? That we've managed to resolve our Mishnah with the opinion that Hamagbiya Metziah Lechavero Kana Chavero. Is this the only way that you can resolve the Mishnah? Some people already shook their heads, but does anyone want to remind us what's the other option? Rav Joel?
We left up poor Ula's solution, right? Which, I mean, it's kind of like, it's interesting because we're reading the Mishnah like Rav Nachman, but we're rejecting Rav Nachman's idea at the same time. It's like a very fascinating take on the whole thing.
Right, that like this, as opposed to our sugya last week, where, you know, to defend the opposite opinion, it was actually based on like two different narrations of the Mishnah, right? That the Ula answer was the way Rav Nachman has told the story of our Mishnah is wrong, right? That when Rav Joel says this sefer is mine, he is saying, when I picked it up for myself, right? I was actually, from the moment I saw that, I was not acting as your shaliach. I'm not changing my mind now, I changed it back then, right? Whereas, according to Rabbi Yochanan, he's conceding the Rav Nachman narrative. He's saying, yeah, when Rav Joel picked up the sefer, he still had me in mind. But just at some point before giving it over to me, he decided he wanted it. And since he hadn't been acting to acquire it for me until then, he's able to do that. So it's interesting that in such immediate juxtaposition, we have two different resolutions of the challenge from our Mishnah to defend the same opinion, right? That they do, and Rabbi Yochanan and Ula, they overlap. I believe Ula is younger than Rabbi Yochanan, but I'm pretty sure they overlap life-wise. If this is originating with Rabbi Yochanan, I think his is actually first. So it's also interesting in the order that we get it. But you could either see it as they weren't mutually aware of each other's answers, or you could see it as one of them found the other unsatisfying, right? They each have their own flaws. Part of the flaw of the Rabbi Yochanan one is that actually, I don't know if folks noticed, but in the bit in Gittin that we're going to look at later, Rabbi Yochanan explicitly makes a statement that saying Tnali is equivalent to saying Zachali. So that's a little bit puzzling. The Tosfos will have a way of resolving it, but that does throw a bit of a wrench into our solution here. And Ula, we saw at the end of last week's sugya, there's an intuitive logic to his defense, but also the support from our Mishnah of, oh, that's what he must have been saying in the Reisha because of the use of the word tchila in the Seifa, right? That it means tchila in both cases. That was his argument. We proved last week that you could actually essentially use that to prove either point, right? That the language of our Mishnah could basically, you could make a diuk to support either read. And so that's potentially a flaw in the Ula logic. Okay, Rav Joel says Rabbi Yochanan matches the Yerushalmi, so yeah. I think that's probably the more original Yerushalmi approach to this problem. And then again, Ula is a sage who goes back and forth between Eretz Yisrael and Bavel, right? So also Rabbi Yochanan isn't an interlocutor with Rav Nachman, is the other thing, right? Like he never meets him. They're just like having these opinions separately, whereas Ula and Rav Nachman interacted about this. Okay. So we have finished this sugya. I think we will take our break here, and then we will resume with some fun rishonim on a couple of the questions. And I will share my screen. One sec. Okay. So there's two main questions we're going to be looking at with these sources. So the first one is premised on understanding some of the specifics of the Tofes the Balchov case, and what some of the sort of halachic nafkaminas are, and also sort of unpacking a particular statement of Rashi's. So the question kind of already gives us away, but does anyone remember what was the qualification Rashi made about what in the person who's Tofes the Baal Chov, how are they operating? / in what context are they operating?
They're just doing it of their own.
They're just doing it. They're a vigilante, you know, they're just a good friend. But Haba Me'alav, right? The fact that Rashi felt the need to state that. He doesn't explicitly say it, but the fact that he says Haba Me'alav very strongly seems to imply that he thinks if it wasn't Haba Me'alav, that if it's someone who is appointed to go do this, that it would work, even though they are in fact acting as a third party. And there's something that at first feels intuitive about that, right? The idea of like, oh, there's a difference between you acting explicitly as the appointee who's acting like for this lender, as opposed to you're just independently deciding. But a lot of the other Rishonim think it makes no sense with the rest of our sugya. So does anyone want to start off with the Ritva here? I'm also gonna zoom a little bit more. Who hasn't read? Sarah, you haven't read, right? Want to take it away?
Sure. Rav Nachman v'Rav de'amrei tavreihu ma'agim etziel chavero lo kana chavero ma'itama havei tofes lebal chov b'makom shachad la'acharim lo kana. Perish Rashi im tofes me'elav dum yadim metziah aval ish shavya le'shaliach letofes kana. Okay. That's basically what you just said, right? Rashi seems to say that he takes it of his own accord, but which then I guess the Ritva sort of filling in would imply that if he went and got it kind of as the appointed shaliach, that would work. He would be kona. V'leita de'im came my makmina de mi po'alim po'el. Oh, okay, good. Mi my machshev mi po'alim po'el vadai de shavya le shaliachu. Okay, so this doesn't make any sense because if that were true, if Rashi's interpretation were correct, then how could this kasha about the po'el make any sense? Because it's obvious that the po'el is a shaliach of the Baal HaBayit. That's kind of what it means to be a po'el, let's say.
Right. That he's like, okay, fine. If it's really, we had already started off by saying, yeah, like Rav Nachman's defense felt intuitive about the po'el being like, yeah, that's different because they're acting like more on the Baal HaBayit's behalf, right? But he said literally that they're Teyad Baal HaBayit. But if it was just true that the only time this Magbia Metzila Chavero doesn't work and the only time Tofes the Baal Chov doesn't work is when you're acting on your own accord, Rav Nachman would have had a very simple defense. That he wouldn't have had to be Teyad Baal HaBayit. He could have just been like, he's a Shaliach. Who cares if like Shaliach can also terminate their shlichut, doesn't make them not a shaliach. That would have been an easier argument to make, right? So now he also makes another point. Ve'od
b'maniti nami ha'amartani li ve'afilu hachi amar Rav Nachman de'afal gav delo amar tchila lo kana de magbia le'atzmo. So this is kind of the same, just like the same kind of kasha repeated with the next step, right? So like we might say, oh, but our Mishnah also like the kasha that, or the kind of comparison to our Mishnah doesn't work if you take Rashi's interpretation, because in the Mishnah he says, go and give it to me. And so Rav Nachman seems to say that even though he didn't say, oh, I don't want, or oh, I'm taking it for myself before he handed it over. When he got it, he didn't. When he picked it up, he didn't acquire it.
Right. But like, again, our Mishnah, the most intuitive interpretation is that this is in fact the person acting on behalf, like acting as a shaliach, like as responding to their command to do this. And nonetheless, Rav Nachman still thinks it doesn't work, right? So that doesn't seem to be an accurate chiluk. And so the Ritva starts off by clarifying, fine, shkoyach, the shlichut thing is an invalid distinction. Even a shaliach of a Baal HaBayit like wouldn't be able to be tofes the Baal Chov, and similarly wouldn't be able to be magbia metzila chavero. But now he says mihu
b'makom shelo chad le'acharim kana afilu lo shavya le'shaliach. So in a place where the Baal Chov doesn't owe anyone else, even if the guy who is coming and taking it isn't a shaliach, he would still be able to do a kinyan for the creditor. Because then, right, because the whole reason we originally thought that you can't be tofes the Baal Chov is because you'd be hurting somebody else. But if there's no somebody else to hurt, then there's not a problem. So it's not a question of agency, it's a question of, harm to some third party, fourth party, whatever, additional party. Okay, Dezachin la Adam shelo lefanav, the local kimide de hayachol memar de lav bal devarim didei, et denicha lo yachol atmia, aval kevan de tafes, ve'en ze yachol hotzia miyado, ve'eno chav lo, kevan shehu chayav laza, shazet tofes be'ado.
Okay. The language here is a bit difficult, but I think
yeah, but we can go back and trace it out. So right, why can he come and take the money for the creditor, even if he's not an appointed shaliach? Because we have this general principle, the zachin la'adav shelo lefanav, he can he can do something kind of, he can acquire, or I don't know, whatever. I'm not going to translate zachin. He can be zoche this stuff for someone else when they're not there, but it's not in his power to say that delev bal dvarim didei, that these are not that I'm stumped if someone wants to help me. I didn't get a chance to get this far.
The lav kol kamina is being used a bit weirdly here, I would say. I think he's essentially using it as like lichatchila, the person shouldn't really be able to do this, that the third party, Rav Joel.
I actually thought it was the debtor doesn't have the power to say you and I have no dealings, right?
I think that it's not that, just because of, I'll explain the way I'm parsing it, then you can explain the way you are. Yeah. The way I've read it is like, it's not totally within the third party's power to do this. Daha yechol lememar, because look, the debtor can say, right? Daha yechol lememar. He can say, lav bal dvarim didiat, that this is a phrase we see him say of like, you're not in charge of my things, basically. Like, you're not involved with me. I have no business with you. Rav Joel?
Yeah, no, I realize there's a gears issue. My version of the Meyuchas Riva has dehai and not deha. So high would be this guy.
All right, so that's a significant girsa difference.
Yeah.
But I think it plays out, right? Because the way this plays out with this girsa is that he essentially is saying, Lichatchila, the third party, ideally probably shouldn't do this, because like, it makes sense for the debtor to be able to be like, who are you? You're a random person, right? Why, like, the people who I owe money to can come grab their money if they want. I'm not totally sure what this the nichal lo yachol lamit by is. Rav Joel, what's your thought on that?
Yeah, my take on it was that it's obvious he can't bring him to court and take the money. What he can do is he can do vigilante justice, right? It's not, nichir, I think, is like pshita, which we've seen.
Right, that like the third party has no actual, like, again, like, yeah, legal claim of their own on this person. But, right, kevan de tafas, the ein zayachol lahotzi miado. What does that mean?
Once he's taken it, and then the debtor can't come and grab it from him.
Exactly. In this case of Eino Chav L'Acherim, the third party, even as a non-shaliach, if they do grab it, it's effective and the debtor has no recourse, right? De'eno Chav Lo, Kivan Shu Chayav L'Zeh, Shezeh Tofes Bado.
Wait,
sorry,
can I say something?
Yeah, sure.
I'm wondering if the conversation here is going between maybe you all understood this, but is going between the person. In other words, I came and grabbed a flute from you because I want to collect a debt for my friend. And the owner of the flute says, what are you grabbing this flute for that guy? You are not a Baal Devarim Didi. Who are you? You have no standing. You have no legal standing. You're just some random guy. You can't get it. The other guy can get the flute because I owe him money. But you are not a Baal Devarim Didi. You're nobody. And then he says, he can't actually legally get that flute back. Because he took it for him. He can't get it out of his hand. It's going to stay with the guy who grabbed the flute because it's for the Eino Chavlo, because he didn't actually do any damage to the owner of the flute. Because he owes the flute to that other guy. He owes some money to that other guy.
Right.
That's what I understood. Is that the way you understood it?
The one thing I would clarify is you read as the Denicha de lo Yachol needs by Kevan, that as being continuous, whereas I think there's an interruption there because the aval, right? It's that, okay, granted, the third party themselves does not have, I think Rev Joel's explanation makes sense of like, the third party would not be able to get that flute from this guy in court because the third party has no legal claim themselves on that flute. They couldn't bring the debtor
okay, nice.
court,
okay. Now,
right?
who's suing who? You're right. It's the flute. The guy who grabbed the flute maybe couldn't have sued for it.
Right. But
No,
once he grabbed it,
it's really the concept of legal standing. There's a concept in mishpat of legal standing. I can't just come along to my neighbor's house and start suing the Vad Bayit on behalf of the people who live in that house because I don't live there. You have to be one of the people who are affected by the you can't sue unless you're one of the victims of the event.
Exactly. But nonetheless,
unless of course you're South Africa, in which case you can.
But in this case, in this case, the idea is that fine, that person couldn't have brought this flute out in court, but once they've seized it, it's effective. Exactly. Because when it comes down to it, this isn't considered, it's not like the third party has been chav to the debtor, right? I'm not causing the debtor a loss because that's money the debtor owed, right? There's a difference between when you're chav la'acherim, that applies to when you're causing like other lenders a loss because they can't collect the money that they're owed. But like me collecting the money from the debtor, that's not me being like zoche, the creditor, and chav the debtor. The debtor owed that money.
Exactly.
Right? So in that case, the Ripa is like in a scenario where there aren't other people who would lose out, it works even if I am not a shaliach. So Sarah, do you want to pick up with the Vahane Mile? Here.
Yeah, okay. Vahane Mile Metziah. למאן דאמר המגביה מציאה לחברו קנה חברו, משום דהווה כתופס במקום שהוא חב, וקנה, אף אגב דלא שבי השליח. ולא תימה היינו כמציאה שהיא עבודה מכל מקום לאדם, ואינו לבעלים. So basically he's saying, you can't, now we're going to kind of reject the comparison between Tofes Labalchov and the Metziah, because if we think that this case where the Balchov is only owes money to one person and therefore no one else is harmed, that's kind of somehow different, or sorry, that changes how we think about the comparison between Tofes Labalchov and the Metziah, because in the Metziah it seems like there are other people harmed, right? So the
Metziah, don't think of it as a diamond buried in the ground, but think of it as like somebody's earring.
Right, it belongs to a person.
And so therefore you're chav to him, maybe you might say. By me finding that Metziah, I'm chav to the person who lost, the poor guy who lost the earring.
Well, so we'll get into the Ritva, and I believe also the Rosh get into that. But the Ritva is saying that for those like Rabbi Yochanan, right, who believe Hamagbiya Metziah Chavero Kana Chavero, they think that this is because Habe Ketofes Bimkom Shalochav, V'kana afagav delo shavi shaliach. Right? That like this is like the scenario he just spelled out of, he says, oh, how can we disambiguate these two cases? We can say that Magbia Metzila Chaviro is not like being Chav Acherim, right? That again, one of the
right, but now he's suggesting that you might think otherwise.
Well, yeah, he's about to give the lo tema, but first he's saying, what's the intuitive distinction? The distinction is that, like, yeah, as opposed to in the case of the debt, where, like, again, if I only had $7,000 and I owed $15,000 total, right? Someone who comes and sees like the $5,000 for Rev Joel is going to cause Rev Nachum to not be able to collect his full $5,000 debt, right? That's something he's owed. That's his money, right? But like the Metziah, I'm just causing someone else, I'm costing them the opportunity to gain. But costing someone the opportunity to gain is not the same as costing them something that they are already owed, right? So that's like the initial intuitive distinction. And now he's about to say something that you shouldn't argue, right? Velo tema.
Velo tema dahainu k'mitziah shehi avuda mikol makom le'adam ve'ena leba'alim. So you might don't respond in the following way, that a mitziah that is like a lost object is nonetheless belongs to someone. It was somebody's wallet or somebody's wallet. That's a bad example. Somebody's earring.
Or I think that like, right, that it's totally lost and has no owners whatsoever.
Right. But that it still could be. Joel is shaking his head.
Yes. Sorry, Sarah. No, because it was also what Rav Nachum said earlier. I think he's saying it has no connection to anybody now, right? It had Baalim, but
he's actually, I think, saying the Metziah is the most Mekel case of like a Metziah is totally not shayach to anyone. Something that, but this is all within the lo tema. The argument you shouldn't make is, oh, with the Metziah, which is totally lost, has no ownership, whatever, then the person would think, you know, it works to acquire Hamagbiya Metziah lechavero kana chavero. Aval
hatofes davar shehula aniim lo kana. But if you came and took something that belonged to the poor, i.e. the Peah case, you would not be kona. Unless you were like directly appointed as a shaliach.
Right. Maybe that's a little different because it has a bit more of a shayachut than a random Metziah, which like literally anyone has a right to. But he says that's not true. Belohi.
Okay, belohi. To ha-Metziah. Le Rav Nachman have a ketofes lebalchov. Kinomar lamala. Ve'amar. Degaryat. What? Okay, ve'kenireli. Ve'amar. Degaryat fe mitofes b'makom shalochav. Havadai lo mashmahachi elahacha v'hatam tama mishum de lo ba'enan shaliach. Okay, so what I think is, sorry, where did I start reading? Ela b'shavia shaliach v'lohi. I don't think that's what's going on. I'm not saying that you can only pick something up for an ani if you are actually appointed as their shaliach. Because for Rav Nachman, he does think that a Metziah is comparable to a case of Tofes Lebalchov. And I agree with him. Ve'amar degaryet fe mitofes b'makom shalochav. And I actually think it's how do we want to translate Vegaryet fe? It's like a worse case than or something, like I don't know.
Yeah, like worse or like, well, I mean, it can be worse or lesser than, but I think
worse or lesser, right? It seems to lead in maybe different directions, but so I was a little bit stumped by this.
Is a greater loss too?
Say that again, Josie. I just didn't hear you.
Would be causes a greater loss too?
Yeah.
I think that it's lesser than. I think he means that it's lesser than, that like this is like taking a Metziah is an even less of a big deal than like, for example, seizing a debt for somebody in a case where it doesn't cause others loss, right? Because again, the Metziah no longer has any shayachut to anybody, right? Like whatsoever, right? You are literally like the Baal has totally had yeush, like there is no shayachut whatsoever. Whereas like in the case of the Tofes, even if it's lo chav la'acherim because there aren't other creditors, the Ritva explained why, okay, fine, you can still call it not chav la'acherim because the debtor did owe the money, but it's like you're still like taking something from someone, even if it's money they owe. And so I think he's saying that a Metziah is like the most lenient case. Like that this is even lesser than like taking money where it doesn't cause loss to other creditors.
Yeah, I mean, and that makes some good intuitive sense because it's not like, if you think about like a system of property that you want to maintain where you like teach people to kind of have certain boundaries or like respect for property, then you might say, well, yeah, like just coming and kind of sweeping in as the vigilante is much more disruptive than kind of taking a Metziah that maybe you have a dubious claim to or something like that. That requires a kind of more, and even just the language of like Tofes is like something more violent about that, or something like that. Okay. It's clear that that's not what this means. Rather, in all these cases, the reasoning is based on the fact that we don't need a shaliach at all.
Yeah, I think essentially the Ritva is trying to close together his point that like shlichut is just not a relevant factor. The factor is whether you're chav or not chav, right? That like he thinks if you're chav la'acherim, then it doesn't work. And if you're not chav la'acherim, then it works even if you're not a shaliach, right? That he's dismissing the notion that like, oh, maybe there's this intermediate stage. He says no, right? It's purely about like, are you causing a loss to others? If so, then it doesn't work. If not, then you're just zachin la'adam. And like, shkayach, it's effective. And shlichut just is an irrelevant factor in this whole thing. Okay. Any thoughts or questions before we move to the Rosh? The Rosh, I'm going to read the first part because a lot of it is repeating the Ritva, but he has an interesting additional bit coming in here. But any burning thoughts? Rav Joel, was that a semi-hand?
It depends how much you want to talk. I'm happy to read if you want to break, but
yeah, if you want to, do you want to like quickly read up to the Verbeno Chananel in the Rosh, just so it goes through a lot of what the Ritva said, but we just to give us the background he's working from.
This is you're just taking from the Piskei Rosh, right, Simon?
Yes.
Yeah, I can just read it out. Do you mind if I read it out of my Gemara? I think it'll be about this.
Go crazy.
All right. I'll skip the Mishnah here and just go right to the Gemara. Oh, you did too. Okay. Rav Nachman Gemara. Rav Nachman Rav Chisda the Amei Tarvaihu Mabia Metziah Lechavero Lo Kana Chavero. My time. Have toves levalcho b'makom shechav le'acharim. V'chol toves levalcho b'makom shechav le'acharim lo kana. All right, that's all the Gemara, right? Rav Nachman and Rav Chisda say you can't, acquire a Metziah on behalf of your fellow because you're as if you're taking a debt and preferencing one person over another in the debt. Okay. Afilu as'o ba'al chov shaliach v'katav lo harsha'a. Even if the creditor, that's the right word, right? Yes, creditor made you a shaliach and wrote a shtar harsha, like gave you power of attorney, essentially, right? Like we all do for, not all of us, but many people do for San Chames on Pesach, right? You give a shtar harsha, all right. Because he doesn't have the power to be beneficial to one person and to be harmful to others at the same time, right? There's like we're zachin le'adam shelo b'fanav, but not at the expense of other people. That's essentially what he's saying. You can't do that, no matter what legal manners you use. And the other people, the other creditors, didn't write him a shtar harsha. It says you can decide who to collect for, right? It's like kind of amazing. I guess then if like all of them got together, like, yeah, we would like to preference this one person, go ahead, then we could pull it off. So, all right. Ve'in yad hashaliach ki yad hameshaleach lachov le'acharim kedemochak bektuvot gabe yemar bar chashu shamar l'shluchot tfos li mibal chov ve'afilu hachi amrule Rav Papa Rav Huna brei Rav Yoshua at tofes bal chov makov shachav le'acharim. All right, so and we say that the shaliach hand is not like the hand of the one who sends him in the case of being able to harm others. as we see in this case in Ketubot with this guy named Yemar Bar Hashu, right, who said to his shaliach, go take from this
like a boat, I think that he was.
Say again,
Yeah.
sorry, Lexie?
I think it was like a boat that he was owned.
You know, great. I don't remember, but and nonetheless, right? Rav Bava Ravuna said, no, you are pulling this very thing we said you can't do, right? You are tafes balchov v'makom shemach.
It's interesting that the Ritva didn't bring in this source because it seems like the most damning critique of Rashi. We have this literal, explicit case in Ketubot where this guy appoints a shaliach, and they nonetheless say that's tofes the balchov b'makom shelav l'acherim, and it doesn't work, right? So that clearly is not effective. And now he makes the same point as the Ritva.
Ve'od migufa dematnitin the ba'a Rav Nachman the be'am Rav Nachman lemedak me'ani le'ani machloket okay, so and further from the Mishnah itself, where Rav Nachman finds it necessary to read this as the machloket really in Peah is from ani to ani. V'hatam aso shaliach, and we know that our Mishnah he made him a shaliach. Why? Because he de'amar tanali, he said, give it to me. V'katani delo kanami shum dechav l'acharim. He says no, he didn't acquire it because he has an obligation, or this Metziah is a chav l'acharim, or also the Peah is a chav l'acharim. Right? You're hurting other people because of it.
So up until now, we see mainly the same argument as the Ritva, right? That like they both disagree with Rashi. They think the shlichu element is irrelevant. Even if someone's a shaliach, if they're a third party, they can't acquire for one person and cause a loss to the other. He adds in, I think the meaningful logic of like, yeah, you can act on one person's behalf, but actually if you're benefiting them at the cost of others, you're trying to act on those other people's behalf who did not appoint you as shaliach, right? So that doesn't work. Even though, again, obviously he makes the distinction of like, any of these creditors have the right to go seize their property, even though it causes a loss to the other, because like that's their money, right? You have a right to that. You have the right to do that for yourself, right? But third party doesn't have the right to benefit one person at the cost of the others. Okay, but now he has an interesting extra discussion that's brought in here. Rabbeinu Hananel.
You want me to continue, or do you want to hand it to somebody else?
Actually, good point. Who hasn't read today? Jess, do you want to read Rabbeinu Hananel?
Sure. ורבנו חננאל, זיכרונו לברכה, כתב, דווקא שליח, אבל אפוטרופוס קנה דיד בעלים הוא, והווה כתופס לבעל חוב במקום שאינו חב לאחרים. So Rabbeinu Hananel says that's true about a shaliach, but an apotropos, some kind of guardian, really would be an extension of the Baal Chov, and that wouldn't be considered a case because then the apotropos acquires it really sort of very much with no agency at all of his own. Therefore, you're not in this case where you're saying he's taking it from someone else. He really is kind of acting as the person themselves.
Right. We've seen there's a couple stages, like similar to what we saw Rav Nachman is his defense from the poel thing. That he's like, a poel isn't a shaliach. A poel is like an extension of the Baal Habayit's hand, right? Even though we often talk about a shaliach that way, we seem to be at least saying here there's a distinction. There's people who literally act like as the person versus people who are like acting on their behalf, but like as a separate entity. So the apotropos is like the first one, right? It's like the poel. Okay.
ומקשינן, איך יכול לתפוס בלא השעה? למלא לאו בעל דברים דידיית. וכתב רב אלפס, זיכרונו לברכה, בתשובה, דווקא במקום דאיכא פסיידא לבעל חוב, כגון דמת לווה, ואי לא תפס למלווה מפסיד לגמרי, דמטלטלין דיעצמי לא משתבנה לבעל חוב. So we bring this difficulty of how is it possible to seize this without permission of the other people who might lose out? Because possibly someone say like, look, this isn't your thing, and the Rif's solution,
like the Rabbeinu Hananel is like, actually, even in a case where it's lo chav la'acherim, this is the challenge that the Ritva imagined in the debtor's mouth of like the Rabbeinu Hananel was like, actually, yeah, like even if it's not hurting the other people, shouldn't the debtor be able to say, you're a random person? Like, how could you as a non-shaliach just take my things, right? And so what did the Rif say?
The Rif saying it's specifically in a case where there would be a loss to the creditor, like where the borrower, if it's not seized for the creditor, it's going to be entirely lost because, for example, we don't mortgage the movable possessions of orphans for the creditor.
Right, that this beautiful. Also there's a note I think from the Pilpala Harifta that the meat should really be more like the Goses Slova or something, that like the borrower is like hasn't died yet, but they're like dying, right? And if they die, then the orphans are in charge of the estate, and as just said, like none of their movable property is mortgaged. So if this person doesn't have any significant land holdings, then if the money isn't seized right now, the creditor might just not get their money back. So the RIF kind of like limits the scenario, even in a case of lo chav la'acherim, right? That everyone seems to agree that b'imkom shechav la'acherim, it just doesn't work, right? But the RIF is saying even when it's eno chav la'acherim, a third party can only effectively seize when it's in this kind of like shat hadachak, like urgent circumstance where if they don't do that, the creditor will like, is going to lose out their money, right? He gives some more scenarios. Inami
legavra de mafsid nachse. Alternatively, it's like somebody who causes him to lose possessions.
I think it's a person who's like damaging their property. Rav Joel.
Yeah, I wasn't sure if it was either that or they're like someone who's just like, that they're about to get hit financially and like they made a bad investment, so you better take your money now.
Yeah. Like somebody who's like not going to have much money left for long. And the next example is pretty similar. Inami
ba'ani ve'arad minachsav v'nireh lebeit din sheyafsidu kol nechsav ad shelo yavo ba'chav ki hagav ne'amrinan kanei chavira v'takana hi shehitkinu. So this is a case of a poor person who's, destitute enough that the case has come before the Beit Din, and the Beit Din are going to presumably sell his possessions, and there will not be enough remaining to pay back the Balchav. In that sort of case, you decree that it is possible for the Chavera to acquire.
Right, that this is the view of the RIF, that the RIF thinks that like Me'ikar Hadin, really, a third party should never be able to seize for their buddy, right? But that in a case where it's not chav la'acherim, and there's also these like exigent circumstances of like if it doesn't happen now, the Baal Chov might just like lose out. It's basically a takana that's like tacked on to the general law. We're like, this is an exception. In this case, a third party can effectively acquire. But the Rosh does not like this. Vilona here. Or wait, sorry, I think I skipped a bit. Ha'ilu, yeah.
Right. והאילו היה הלווה עמיד ויכול לפרוע לבעל חוב, מה שיש לו אצלו, הרי זה אומר לו, לאו בעל דברים תדיעת, שמין לו. So this is just really continuing the previous string of cases. If we're doing this sort of estimations procedure for the borrower, and they might be able to pay back the Baal Chov, then if he says, you're not the master of my things, we do listen to them. So in this case where they might be able to pay it back, that's not enough of an extenuating circumstance to justify allowing a third party to do this.
Right. In that scenario, the RIF thinks even if it's not going to cause a loss to other creditors, it still isn't effective. But now the Rosh is going to push back.
V'lo d'amari d'tofes lebal chav b'mkom shechav. Amar b'Yochanan d'tofes lebal chav b'mkom shechav l'acherim la kane miklal dehecha she'en chav l'acherim medina kane v'lo mechamat takana. So Nor says, well, Rabbi Yochanan said in the Sugya and Ketubot that one who seizes for a creditor in a place where there are other creditors does not acquire, from the general principle that
I'd say this implies.
This implies that where there isn't, when there aren't other creditors, we would say in general that you can acquire, and we don't need it to be some kind of takana or extenuating circumstances.
Right. I think that this is intuitive, right? That the Rosh says the language of Tofes the Balchov bimkom she'achav la'acherim lo kana strongly implies that it's like, yeah, this is the exception. Bimkom she'achav la'acherim lo kana. Default is if it's not chav la'acherim, it works. Right? He's like, that is the most like automatic implication. It's not implying that like, being able to acquire it would be the special exemption. It seems to imply that this is the case where it doesn't work, but otherwise it's effective. And he builds on this. ולא מסתבר.
ולא מסתבר למימא דהכי אמר רבנו יוחנן דהכתחב לאחרים לא עשו תחנה. It's not logical to say that Rabbi Yochanan is saying that where there is a case of chav lacharim, you wouldn't do a takana.
Right. He's like that would be the potential argument, but he's like, that just doesn't really seem to be the intuitive read of this statement.
ועוד דמילתא דפשיטא היא דלמה יתקנו לזכות לזה לחוב לאחרים. And furthermore, this is kind of obvious, because why would they make a takana for the measure of this one when there are debts to other people? ועוד מדמייתי לה מגביה מציע לחברה alma dina kama. And furthermore, since we bring this case of someone who picks up a found object for his fellow, consequently, we're talking about law. We're not talking about some kind of takana.
Right. The fact that we learned from one to the other, right? Like you can't learn from a takana to apply that to a random other case, right? So it seems that this is just like, this is the deen, specifically in a case where it's like chav la'aserim, it doesn't work. And when it's not, it does. There's no takana there. That's just like what the law is.
Hilkach nireli d'shurat hadin hu. Like, it's the law. ולא שייך להקשות למלא לאו בעל דברים דידיעת, שהרי אין תבעו לדין להוציא ממנו כלום, שיוכל לומר אין להשיב לך כיוון דאין לך הרשעה. And it's like the difficulty of saying that this doesn't apply, this difficulty just isn't applicable to say that, you are not the master of this person's things, because you're not claiming in order to exclude anything from him, that you can say that you wouldn't return anything to him since there is no permission.
I think that he's making a similar point here that the Ritva did, which is that, like, again, you might have said, well, because this third party couldn't bring him to court, that means that, like, he could just respond and say, give me my thing back. Right? You don't have a harsha, like, give me my thing back. You couldn't have claimed this in court, right? But no, rather, Ella,
הולך ותופס משלו ולא מציע מה להחזיר לי מה שתפסת, כיוון שאין לך הרשעה. So rather, he goes and he claims his thing, and he can't say, return to me what you took, because you don't have permission.
Right. He's not allowed to say, oh, you're not a shaliach, you have no right to this, because why does it work? Tzachin la'adam.
תזכין לאדם שלה בפניו, והווה כאילו תפס המלווה בעצמו. You're allowed to benefit people in their absence, and it's as though the creditor seized it himself. ואינו חייב לאחרים כיוון שהלווה מודה שהוא חייב או השטר מוקיים ביד התופס. And it's not a case of חייב לאחרים because the borrower accepts that he's liable, or we have established the credentials of the shtar that was in the hand of the person seizing it.
Exactly, right? So ultimately, what we seem to land on the side of, with both the Ritzvah and the Rosh, again, they make like respective points, but they both seem to say, in a scenario where one is not chav la'acherim, everyone would say that it is effective. And the shlichut question is just not relevant, right? Whether you're a shliach or not, if it's not chav la'acherim, it works regardless. If it is chav la'acherim, it doesn't work even if you are a shliach. Okay, so now they've both made some very strong points as to why the shlichut seems irrelevant. So now the shach bravely comes in to defend Rashi, who seems to mostly just be wrong. But chas v'shalom, obviously he is making a different point. So Michael, do you want to read the shach?
Sure. ואפילו עשאו שליח וכולי, נראה לי כוונת רש"י, דפשיטא דבדיבורא בעלמא, שאומר לו לתופס, שאומר לו לתופס, לא הווה שליח, וכדמו כך ממתניתין דתנה לי. אלא מה שכתב רש"י.
Pause for the Ella. So what's this first point?
So it appears that Rashi's intention in writing what he wrote is like just for a general statement where, right, like not kind of using like the specific distinction that we've been looking at, but like where the Rochev says to the person like who is grabbing it, and where he's not appointing him as a shaliach.
Or that doesn't work to appoint one as a shaliach, or not in such a way that would be effective.
Oh, right. In a case where it's just a general statement, saying to grab something, that doesn't make the person a shaliach.
Right. Not in a way that would, again, like be remotely effective to acquire something as a third party. Ella.
And this, right, that's right. It's the kind of right in accordance with what's in the Mishnah, where it's just like casting the Mishnah as a general statement. Ela mash ktav Rashi me'achar shelo asa'o shaliach litfos kavanato shescharo liot shlucho litfos. Rather, what Rashi is saying is that since the Rochev al Gabei Behema is not like specifically appointing the person to be a shaliach to grab the item, the Rochev's intention is to kind of like hire the person to be his shliach to grab it.
I think Kavanato here is him still referring to Rashi confusingly, that like when Rashi says, oh, that because someone wasn't rendered a shaliach, it's not effective, he means that like they weren't, hired as a shaliach to seize something.
Right. It's almost if you add the word lo. Kavanato shelo sacharo liot shlucho litzvos. He didn't actually pay him to be a shliach.
Exactly. That when Rashi says haba me'elav, he's like, it doesn't have to really be me'elav. It could be that like even the person told you to do it, but they didn't hire you.
Okay.
Right.
So Rav Nachum, do you have a different girsa that reads?
No. I'm just saying
shalos charo, or you're reading that into.
I'm just to clarify what he says. I'm putting in.
Because it's ma'achar shelo asa'o shaliach. I think you have to read it as ma'achar shelo asa'o shaliach litzvos kavanato. What he means is that Rashi's intent is ma'achar shelo parentheses, scharo liot shlucho,
Okay.
Exactly. I'm just making it more clear.
Right. The thing that he didn't do is scharo.
Exactly.
Okay.
Okay. The kavanat Rashi is there.
The kavanah Rashi bazeh de lo tikshe my mishane hatam beperak kama de Metziah shane poel diadokiad balabait behapshita de ein poel misha oved lebal habayit
Mishuabad.
mishuabad lebal habayit ka'eved kanani de nema de have kiyad bal habayit atzmo de ha Metziat
Eved
Eved Ivri la'atzmo.
Or pause there because it's going to continue.
Okay. And so Rashi's intent or Rashi's understanding of this is that you shouldn't raise this difficulty of saying like what's different there in the first parak of Bava Metziah, right? Where we have this question about the worker who is considered to be like an extension of the Baal Habayit. But that like obviously the Poel is not like indentured or like in the service of the Baal Habayit in the same way as an Eved Kanani, where we would say that the Eved Kanani is like the Baal Habayit himself, right? Where kind of he doesn't have like separate legal standing or separate rights. Right, but rather it's like a case of an Eved Ivri where the Metziah belongs to the Eved Ivri.
Or that this is like daha, like what is the difference between Eved Ivri, let alone a Poel, which is that they're able to get their own Metziahs, right? That an Eved Kanani cannot acquire a Metziah, right? That they are considered indistinguishable from the Baal. So this is a really smart point the Shach is making, right? Which is that Rav Nachman said, oh, the Poel case is different. That's not like Hamagbia Metziah L'Chavero, which doesn't work. Because the Poel is like Yad Baal Habayit too. Okay, so now going back to what we were saying earlier, we have to have a ranking, right? We have to have the ranking of like, okay, according to the one who says Magia Metziah L'Chavero Lo Kana Chavero, certainly it doesn't work when you're just a random person operating on your own. And according to these other sources that the Rosh and the Ritva brought, it seems like it doesn't work even if you've told someone to do something for you. But based off of Rav Nachman's terus of, Shani Poel, Diad Bal Habayitu, there's some way in which that's different than Stam Shlichut, that's different than telling someone to do a thing, where they're considered to be acting just like as an extension of you. And that works, right? But nonetheless, the Shach makes a fourth tier, right? Which is that you have like an Eved Knani who is literally considered to be the Baal Habayit's property, right? That under very specific conditions, an Eved Knani can be used as like a chatzer of a Baal Habayit to acquire things for them, right? That, again, if they're sleeping and tied, but for different reasons, but that they are considered to be literally an extension of the Baal Habayit. They have no independent agency or ability to acquire for themselves. And we know that that's not the category that a Poel or even an Eved Ivri is in, right? So they're not the Yad Baal Habayit in the same way that an Eved Knani is. So Rashi is like, okay, we know that if you operate totally independently, according to Rav Nachman, it doesn't work. If you operate based off of the word of another person, according to Rav Nachman, it doesn't work. If you are an Eved Knani, of course it works because you just like are the Baal Habayit. But now we have this fourth tier, which is you're not an Eved Knani, but there's some way in which you are operating more directly on the Baal Habayit's behalf. And so he's saying that that's the case where you are being paid to work for the Baal Habayit, right? So we have this last bit, az vadai, or elavadai.
Elavadai shane poel sheshcharo lakate mitziot. Kedeita b'shas.
Yeah, b'shas.
La, but it's a
I don't know
long.
what the, yeah, b'shas. I think just like in this like Masechet.
Could this be like Shas? Well, he's in the Choshen Mishpat. Right. It could be like Shas Lakaman or Lael somewhere compared. I guess it's like the Lakaman here. Nimsa dehave shlucha. V'kivan shescharo liot shlucho have yado ki yado ken yireli kavanah Rashi. Right. So rather, this must be referring to a different case where the Poel has been hired to collect loose objects, which I guess we have an example of on Daf Yud Bet Amud Bet. And in a case where the Poel has been hired to collect loose objects, then we certainly would find that that they're the shaliach of the Baal Habayit, and that since the Poel has been hired as the Baal Habayit's shaliach, their hand is certainly like that of the Baal Habayit. They're considered an extension of Baal Habayit. Whatever they find belongs to Baal Habayit. According to my understanding, this must be the intention of Rashi.
Wonderful, right? So I think, to be honest, I don't know how pshat it is that this is what Rashi had in mind, but I think it's an incredibly smart distinction of the shaf. I think it's a really like clever point that the poel is considered to be a category that is different than a stam shaliach or different than the tanali, but is also obviously inherently different than an eved knani. Rav Joel?
No, I think it's so brilliant because I think it was the Meuchas Laridva. It was like, well, the argument about the Poel contradicts Rashi's whole thing about Shaliach, because he's like, he could have just said, but he's a Shaliach, so how is that a challenge? But that's exactly what he's saying. It does say when it says he's like Kiyada Balamite, it's saying he's like a Shaliach who has,
Yeah, he's like
star.
that's the answer, is that he's the kind of shaliach that works, which is the paid kind. Yeah, it's very smart. Okay, I think we will not have time to look at the Gitin Sugya inside. If anyone didn't have the chance to look at it, I would highly recommend, because I think it's really fascinating in conversation with what we just looked at, both last week and this week. We also get the source of, remember that random little Rashi about an ani who has a field, can't collect their own paya there. We see why Rabbi Eliezer is forced to explain that way. It's an interesting little section, but the part that is most relevant for this Tosfot is that Rabbi Yochanan holds Tofes the Balchov Bimkosh Chavla Chayrim Lo Kana. So in our Gemaras, does somebody want to read this Tosfot? Amar Rabbi Yochanan, who hasn't read? Max, are you there?
I'm here, but I'm not up to reading it.
No worries. I think everybody else has read, so is anybody feeling Tosfoti? It's pretty short. I can't just call on somebody, but again, if someone's feeling really enthused, then all the better.
This is the Tosfot on Gittin Yud Aleph, or the Tosfot on Bava Metziah?
The Tosfot and Bava Metziah on our page. Jacob, I think I saw a hand, so Amar Rabbi Yochanan.
Amar Yochanan, Hamagbia Metziel Chavero, Hana Chavero. Va'af al gab de'it le Rabbi Yochanan b'parak hakotev, u'b'parak kama degitin, tovis balchov lo kane. Hainu dafka heka de lo sayach migo de zache lenafshe, migo de zache lenafshe. De'en ova chayev klum letofes, aval mitzia de'ika migo kana. So that even though that Rabbi Yochanan with Parka Kotev and the first part of Gitin, one who grabs for a creditor doesn't acquire for the creditor. Hainu dafka hechadlo shayach migo de zache lenafshe. This is specifically where the idea of migo zache lenafshe zache lechabre, that's specifically where that is not relevant. Den lo v'chayev klum le tofis, that the lendee isn't like the person who's in the middle of the equation, I guess, isn't obligated to pay anything to the tofis.
Right. In the scenario I gave earlier, I owe $5,000 to Reb Joel and to Reb Nachum and to Josie. I don't owe anything to you. Right? There's no capacity in which you could get money from me for yourself. Right?
But with the Metziah, since there is Migu, yeah, he acquires.
Exactly. Right. So I think that there's two.
Explain why is by Metziah the Migo is applicable.
Well, I guess because it's not
If I see the nice Sefer on the Hefker table and I decide to get it for Reb Joel, what else could I have done?
Taking it for yourself.
Exactly.
Oh, okay.
Right? That with a Metziah, I, just like anybody, had the power to get this for myself. And so, again, the Ula formulation of Migo de Zache, aka Migo de Ibae Have Zache, that in a case where if you wanted, you could have gotten it for yourself, you can acquire it for somebody else. That applies in a Metziah. It doesn't apply in the case of Tofes the Balchov, because that third party has no claim on the debtor, right? They would have no ability to acquire for themselves. Right? So that's also mostly where you don't have to read the Timuk Betzet inside. It quotes, the Ran's explanation of the Ramban. The main distinction the Ramban makes is one that we saw in the Rosh and the Ritva, right? That I think there's two main ways that, according to the Rabbi Yochanan school of thought, you can hold Tofes the Balchov lo kana, but Magbia Metziah lechaviro kana, right? What's one of them that the Ritva and the Rosh mentioned? What's different between those cases?
Sorry, I spaced out of it with that last question.
For anybody. Rav Joel?
You're not actually really harming other people. It doesn't really, with the Metziah the same way you are with debt.
Exactly, right? So one meaningful distinction is to say that in the case of Metziah, it's not chav la'acherim. And then what's the other one the Tosfot just pointed out? Rav Joel?
We're talking about a case where in a Metziah, you're not really a complete third party, right? You could acquire it for yourself. And therefore, the same way, if you were actually another creditor, you could acquire it on behalf of a different creditor.
Exactly, which is also an interesting point, right? That it seems, right, like the Rav Nachman school of thought would say that in the scenario I laid out, and it's important that in this scenario I have three creditors. Rav Joel would not be able to seize money for Rav Nachum because that could cause Josie a loss. right? According to Rav Nachman, it would seem because he doesn't hold by migo de zache lenafshe, even though Rav Joel does have the ability to claim his money from me, Rav Nachman would still say he can't claim another creditor's money from me in a way that causes a third party a loss. Whereas Rabbi Yochanan would say, yeah, Rav Joel could do that. Rav Joel could seize some of my money for Rav Nachum because he could have also seized that money for himself, right? And that's what's happening in the case of the Metziah. The only other thing I think is interesting, the very last bit in the Shittim and Kobetzet here, is that the Ramban seems to think, unlike what the Ritva and the Rosh said, that one might think in the case of Tofes the Balchov, even if it wasn't explicitly causing a loss to other creditors, that those people might think it doesn't work because it still is a sort of loss, quote unquote, to the debtor, right? Even though it is money that they owe. Whereas a Metziah, it's truly a loss to nobody, right? Like the person, the initial owner has fully had Yeush, right? They have fully given up any claim to that, any hope of finding it. So it is like truly not like harming or causing loss to anyone. Whereas he's like, no, maybe even if there aren't other creditors, the third party still can't seize this creditor's debt because it is kind of harming the debtor, even though it's money they owe. Okay. That is all for today. And I'm assuming next week we will pick up with the next Mishnah.
Yeah. Next week, next Mishnah, I'll send out sources. You can already start the Mishnah and the Gemara and Rashi and Tosfot. We'll look at some other Gemaras that the Tosfot bring. So I'll send you out some sources.
Sounds good.
Yeshikoyach, Lexie.
Cheers, everyone.